high potential or leadership potential for what? And that's always like the part of the question that I work with my clients to have a real clear sense around the broad domains that actually make good leaders and effective individuals. EQ, curiosity, learning, and then drive and persistence. Pretty much then you have the foundation to work on a lot of other things.
Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Reece Akhtar, co-founder and CEO at Deeper Signals. He's an organizational psychologist specializing in applied personality assessments and computational psychometrics. As a researcher at NYU and UCL, he has published scientific articles in personality and machine learning, talent management, and leadership. Given his experience, I'm excited to have him share his insights with you. Well, welcome, Reece. Can you share with us a story that has influenced how you lead yourself or others?
Angela, thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure. I think there's many more stories of bad leadership that I can share than good leadership, which is probably a damning indictment on the state of things. But I think it's something that we can all resonate with. I think there's what's the phrase, like people quit bosses, not jobs. And I think we can all resonate with that. I would say, my first leader, I was very lucky to have someone that adopted like a mentorship approach that took me in when I was very inexperienced, gave me a chance and was very patient, and has ultimately remained a mentor throughout my life and has really helped me get to kind of where I am today and doing the things that I'm doing. And that has definitely shaped the way that I try to lead, right? Whether better words you could ask the people that are on my team, whether I execute on it or not. But I really do believe in like a servantile like form of leadership, right? How can I help you be successful? How can I give people a chance, give them space, give them an opportunity to grow and develop, rather than it be a very kind of top-down, kind of power-driven dynamic. In fact, I don't really like being a leader, period. And so I find it a little uncomfortable directing people. And so the way that I've seen it work really well, given kind of my experiences, is actually kind of trust those around you, give them the space, and how do you create the conditions for them to be successful? That's kind of generally my philosophy to my personal style of leadership, at least.
Okay, well, I want to dive into the piece where you talked about giving trust to others, right? Because whether
Yeah.
you're in an academic setting where sometimes you're like, I have to protect my research because me and my team, or I invested all this time there. What if someone just like steals what I found
Yes.
and then goes and publishes it? Or as an
Yes.
entrepreneur, you're like, I've come up with this assessment or this model. And then you're like, what
Mhm.
if the next day someone else stole it and then puts it in the market before me? So there's a lot of those, I think, different fears that influence leaders within those settings. And then it
Yeah.
causes them to not give that trust. So for you though, how have you been able to give that trust despite those
Yeah.
fears?
No, absolutely. I think like ideas are a dime a dozen, and it's like execution is obviously everything. And the way that you execute is through your team. And so you're absolutely right, right? Like you have to be cognizant and careful with kind of what information you're sharing and trying to protect your IP and, your intellectual property. But I think if you take an approach whereby you are completely skeptical of everyone, nothing's going to get done. And as well, like you're losing then out on the opportunities for kind of sharing ideas and validating ideas and getting kind of new perspectives. So you kind of have to share, you have to lean into that. You have to be willing to run the risk in that you hope that talking about my next startup idea as an example with someone could run away with it. Sure. However, they're starting from probably the same spot that I am. And so they need to build a team, they need to get the resources, et cetera, to make that happen. And, there's a chance that they would share something really interesting, in which case it would make me more effective, my idea better, so on and so forth. But also it's a small world. I think uh, within the IO psychology community, everybody really does know each other. And, that's really great for a variety of different reasons, but also means you can't be a dick. And, if you are, people are going to talk about it. And so high trust, highly collaborative, I think, it generally does pay off. And, there's all sorts of interesting studies to show that that is like the right evolutionary strategy to kind of getting ahead.
I fully appreciate that. And one thing I pulled away from what you just shared also is like either approach, there's risks associated with it.
Of
Right.
course.
And then to me, I'm like, I'd rather give the trust and deal with whatever stress comes that way versus like the other end of things and not getting anything
Yeah,
done. So
absolutely.
looking back though at your leadership journey,
Mhm.
What is one thing you wish you were taught early on that probably would have enhanced your leadership journey to date?
I think delegating would be a lot better. Would have been a skill that I wish I had got better at much sooner. I think there is generally I'm like been an individual contributor in that, like, when I was doing my PhD, you're kind of driving your research yourself. And many of my projects, it's kind of been the same. And, I've had a team around me, but it's more around like, this is my responsibility. I'm going to go ahead and execute on it. And so I kind of have this mindset that, I can own things. I can like take them to delivery. But then it also means that when I see some of my like team members struggling, or that they're overwhelmed, it's easier for me to kind of just jump in and kind of take things off their plate or try to protect them from certain things. So it's like, I'll do it. And in fact, that isn't necessarily, that may help like some short-term gains and make things better for the immediate future, but it doesn't necessarily always set things up for success in the long run, right? There's maybe gaps in institutional knowledge that need to be shared. And so it's about kind of taking more of the time to slow things down, to get to delegate, to bring more people involved, I think is something that I wish I started to do sooner. Although it's like a core part of like how I want to lead, it's sometimes like that kind of care and consideration sometimes can kind of like work against you in terms of being able to manage work like through others.
And so, looking then at how you've gotten better at delegating, what would you say was that tipping point or that moment where you're like, you know what? I think this is what I need to do.
Yeah, I think it's two things I would say. It's like the first is like knowing when you're at complete capacity and it's like, actually I can't do anymore. And I think the second part of it is caring less about certain things. So I read this fantastic book called 4,000 Weeks of Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burke. And he's a fantastic journalist and he writes a lot of books, kind of like the anti-self-help uh, kind of approach. He wrote a great one about positive thinking, and he wrote one about time management, and I think he just put out another one for meditation. But basically, it's like using stoicism and psychology, actual evidence-based psychology, to kind of like think about how do you make yourself happier, or how do you manage your time better, et cetera, et cetera. And so I read this book like probably 4 or 5 years ago now, and talks a lot about kind of stoicism and just kind of managing what you can and controlling what you can and not letting your emotions kind of go to places that about unrealistic expectations. And so once I kind of like, when I read that, everything started to kind of click into place. And so, granted, my team listening to this may still feel like, what is Reece talking about? Like, he's still got a lot more work to do. And that's probably true. But, it's everyone's on a journey and it's always ongoing. So that's kind of like where I want to get to.
You know what? I appreciate that you said everyone's on a journey because it is an iterative process. And
Hmm.
depending on this, where your organization is at, where your team's at, where your life is at, you're going to
Yes.
have to ebb and flow with that. So when it comes to leading within, because I know you had alluded to stoicism a little bit, but how
Uh-huh.
do you effectively lead the leader within, whether it's a routine practice or whatever it may be?
Lists, lots of lists, checklists, to-do lists. Keep like the same to-do list up to date on like 5 different platforms. I think it's like a way of one, kind of controlling the chaos. It's not that like I forget things that are on my to-do list, but it's a way of being able to like look at it, kind of center myself and engage that kind of stoicism in that, there's 25 things in this. I can only do 3 of them today. What are those 3 impactful things? It's a great day if I can get, 2 of them done. So okay if I get 1 of them done. But the reality is I'm never going to get all of them done. So I read this book to get the author now, but it's like, I think it's called something like the Checklist Manifesto or something like that. And I think it's written by a surgeon or a lot with surgeons. And the way that they kind of like maintained their standards was having like standard operating procedures. And a lot of that is just checklists. That's a great way of kind of centering yourself, but then ultimately centering your team. Like, what are the things we need to get done? Let's just like then work through that list. It becomes very objective, very straightforward. And I found that really, really helpful for myself as a way of just managing my own work.
I appreciate that call because even when I have lists, I'm like, it's so satisfying when you're like, I can check this off, or it's like, no, I actually need to like have another bigger piece
Yeah.
instead of just being busy for the sake of being busy. I now want to dive into your zone of genius because I want to
Hmm.
focus on that leadership effectiveness piece and what you're doing through deeper signals. So,
Sure.
based on everything that you're doing and paying attention to, what is a theme or a gap that you are noticing, again, when it
Yeah.
comes to leadership effectiveness and the work that you're doing?
I would say the biggest gap, and this is kind of like a meta gap, I would say, is like just a lack of understanding. I think generally people struggle to understand themselves and they struggle to understand each other. And I mean, I can resonate with this. I'm sure you can as well. We do things you're like, why did I just do that? Or why is Angela talking to me this kind of way? I thought we were friends, or whatever it could have been. And I think if we have this lack of understanding, we then start to misattribute the intentions behind people's behaviors, the way that they're communicating, etc., which then only escalates, right? It's like two complex organizations or beings kind of interacting with a lack of information. We then start to get hostile, we get mad, we get anxious, we get depressed, whatever it could be. And so when I look at the enterprise and kind of teams, there's a lot of frustration because we can't just see eye to eye. We don't know how to communicate with those around us. We don't know how to really understand each other's like strengths and what they bring to the table, and also where their gaps are, and how can I complement them. I think they see that data is reflected in like low engagement, low trust, dissatisfaction, and so I think the more that we can, one, create like a space where people kind of feel safe, like psychological safety is kind of critical, to then be able to put this stuff on the table and talk about it objectively. I think you start to have then the ingredients to work on more tactical things, I should say, like how do we make decisions in the team? Well, we can't really tackle that until we really know, what the underlying kind of causes are for the current ineffectiveness. And that could be a clash of personalities or a lack of alignment around values. So it's always about like the kind of the soft skills or kind of the soft side of leadership or teamwork that needs to get addressed, not necessarily just diving into kind of process and systems, although the two obviously interact with each other.
Okay, so a leader is coming in brand new and doesn't how the heck to actually apply some of the things that you just talked about in terms of creating that environment.
Yeah.
Based on what you're paying attention to, what piece of advice would you offer them?
I think if it's a new leader coming in and they're trying to figure out what's going on, is actually just to stop and listen, stop and observe, try to talk to as many people as you possibly can, and have them people recommend who you should be talking to. And then have them people recommend who you should be talking to. If you do that enough times, you'll start to hear the same kind of names appear or the same themes appear. And in which case you probably know you've kind of, you've boiled the ocean, as it were. And that also obviously takes some time. But by doing that, you've got then an accurate view of the landscape of the team, its challenges, its mission, its history. History is obviously the big one to figure out. And then from there, you can start to work backwards around, okay, this is where the team is currently at. This is where I want to go, where I think the team needs to go. And it's like, how do we make that happen? I think so often leaders will kind of be introduced into a team and kind of maybe do that for a couple of days and then just kind of move on and then start to kind of crowbar the vision on top of everything. And the opposite is true as well. I think kind of like team members can, feel very attached to their leaders, or they could be very relieved to get rid of them. It depends. There is something powerful about teams, the camaraderie, the history that they share. It's like basic in-group, out-group psychology. Like with having a new leader, there's going to be some potential for like organ rejection. And so I think not only is it on the onus is on the leader to kind of take the time, but it's also on the team to kind of give them a chance and to kind of go along with the process, to stay open-minded as well. If both parties can do that, then, you're off to the races.
I appreciate that context. And we just talked a little bit about the new leaders. And then now let's just say higher up in the organization, you're trying to identify who are my high potential leaders. What actually makes a high potential leader, not just because they're an effective individual contributor or because I really like them, which seems to be two common attributes that people go off.
Exactly.
But yeah, for you, decoding leadership, what makes a high potential leader?
There are thousands of books, talking about or trying to define the leadership success. I think like it can come in very different labels, but I would say there are like, I would say 3 kind of broad domains that actually make good leaders and effective individuals. I think the first is, their kind of emotional intelligence. Are they sensitive, aware to how people are feeling? Are they able to manage and regulate themselves accordingly? Do they have that high level of self-awareness to manage their own behaviors, both the good and the bad aspects of their attributes? I think so many leaders are kind of selected for their seductive narcissism, and this kind of EQ side of things is just completely disregarded. It's about being kind of humble. It's about being sensitive. It's about being caring and warm and approachable. I think the second part of it is obviously intelligence and smarts. Like, are you able to be curious, wanting to learn more, trying to understand things, being able to take a broader vision and work to execute it? That can take the form of like phrases like, or terms like learning agility or intelligence, so on and so forth, kind of all cluster under this kind of intellectual horsepower. And then finally, I would say it's around like pure motivation and drive. Like, are you able to persist and fight for the vision that you have set for yourself? And are you able to kind of encourage and inspire that in others around you? And that's obviously where the dark side of leadership can come in with charisma and so on, which, I'm sure many of your other guests have spoken about. But I think if you can identify those three broad domains, right? EQ, curiosity, learning, and then kind of like drive and persistence, pretty much then you have the foundation to work on a lot of other things. Yeah, values then start to pop up, like it's like, okay, values aligned with the organization or the mission, kind of skills and experience, all that kind of stuff starts to matter. But if you think about kind of like raw potential, I would say like those are the basic building blocks. Just one final point is like, high potential or leadership potential for what? And that's always like the part of the question that I work with my clients to try to answer. It's like, yeah, they're trying to find high impact individuals, but there are these ingredients that I just shared, but then you have to have a real clear sense around like, what does performance actually look like? What are you really trying to push the needle on? How can we get as fine-grained as possible around that? So one, we can track performance, but then we can work backwards from that, right? So I need highly intelligent people to execute on what strategy, or they need to be really good at EQ because why? We can deal with the abstractions, but we have to be really clear around like the outcomes and go back from that.
I appreciate that you called out that it's like, why? What are we doing this for? And can we get around the same language, the same behaviors, etc.? Because if you don't even know what that actually looks like, what are you measuring, right? And
hmm
what's success actually look like at the end of the day? And the people are just confused. And so when it comes to just pausing and assessing, what
Yeah.
do you actually think or have noticed gets in the way of different companies or leaders doing what you just did and being curious about whether what success looks like, etc.?
I would say it's the things that stop those kind of conversations are things like one, bureaucracy, and then two, politics. And then I would say maybe three, short-term thinking. I would say those three things are generally always the barriers to any kind of meaningful progress. It's like, one, we have this complicated system. We have all these stakeholders to manage, and, it exists because of itself, not necessarily to kind of push things forward. I think the second then is like people are always trying to climb the greasy pole. And, that's been true throughout all of human history. As we go beyond a certain number of group size, politics, factions start to emerge and become kind of the dominant force, are making it much harder for well-intentioned, good people to be able to kind of rise to the top. And then the last one is kind of short-term thinking. Depending on what type of organization you work for, there are very different demands, and it's hard to always make the case to build for 5 to 10 years into the future when you have stakeholders who they're needing to be met like right now. And it's often a push and pull, but sometimes we can kind of over-index on one, just delaying or ignoring the consequences of those short-term decisions, like now versus 5 years time.
Okay, and for the short-term thinking piece, so what happens when you're in an agile, fast-moving environment? Like,
Yeah.
is there a more scaled-back version of this that we can do? Or is the arguments like, you know what, you're going to pay for it in some way, shape, or form, so might as well take a little bit longer to do it now so that you're setting yourself up for
Yeah.
success in the guardrails that you have?
Yeah. Deepest Things is like the first business that I've started. And so we've been running the business now for about 6 or 7 years. And this is a constant push pull around like, do we pivot? Do we address or invest resources to meet something that we're seeing in the market, or a client is asking for a certain feature, but we're going to have to divert a whole bunch of resources away from something else that we think is important, and vice versa as well. I would say there is no kind of general rule. Maybe that's my own inexperience. showing. But I would say it's so contextual to kind of have to play off that equation, right? Do I meet this current demand? What are the at least known unknowns around kind of what the unintended consequences will be? And am I like comfortable with that risk? And at the end of the day, it is about risk. It's like, can you roll the dice and think like, actually, it's best kind of saying no to this to work on something else, or the opposite. So I don't have a rule there or an answer. All I can say is you just have to try to gather as much information as you can, try to narrow the decision set, and run that calculus. And then, you just got to stick to your decision afterwards, which is also very hard.
Okay, I'm going to dive into the decision-making piece and just risk-taking, because I think that is going to be essential to a lot of leaders making effective decisions these days. So how have you learned to make decisions more effectively and then more effectively take risks when it counts?
One, having a great co-founder that you can kind of talk to, right? I don't think I could ever, nor would I recommend running a business or starting a business without having a great set of co-founders that you trust, that you enjoy working with, and have complementary skills. My co-founder, Uri, is fantastic at thinking through every iteration of every single problem. And so he's like a human computer. And so he can figure those things out and we can talk through it together. So one, I think it's about like your community, your network, the people in your team, and trusting the expertise and kind of working together there. Like I said, nothing unusual, but it's true. And then the other thing is trying to like slow it down. It's not every decision needs to be made like right this moment. And sometimes things have a way of working themselves out as well. And not everything can be controlled. The key thing is to understand what's most important and then make sure you're at least trying to affect that and not get too distracted with all the other smaller decisions and all the other fires burning around you. Sometimes you just have to let those things burn, and let those issues play out, as long as you kind of focus on the things that actually matter. But that's easier said than done. Go back to what I said about short-term thinking and kind of things that are distracting you.
Oh, 100%. And especially with the way that our world is built, it's almost like you're in a pressure cooker to move at this incredibly fast pace. So, based on what you've learned on your journey so far, what is one thing that has helped you effectively slow things down when you need to?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. Like, how have I learned to slow things down? Yeah, I think wow. I don't know why maybe it's because I've only had one cup of coffee today and it's 7:30 a.m. and my brain's not working. But I think that's a really smart question. Like, how have I learned to slow things down? I think it's actually not too dissimilar to what I just shared around you have a team around you, right? And you've selected them for a reason because they have expertise or knowledge or perspectives that are hopefully better than your own, right? I really try to subscribe to the kind of philosophy that, each new hire should be better than you, because, what's the point? Especially my team is like distributed. So I'm here on the West Coast and my team is in Croatia and Europe, New Zealand. And so we're across all different time zones. It's great when it overlaps. And there's times when you're kind of in the dark and that like, I need to get an answer from someone, but it's going to have to wait until, tomorrow morning when I'm awake and they're online. And so that has actually been helpful because, there's been times when I haven't engaged, my team. I make a decision, I kind of dust my hands off, and then, wake up in the morning and it's like, what the hell did I do? Like I now within 24 hours, I can see like the unintended consequences, like pan out. And so by product of like how we're organized, we sometimes have to slow things down because we have to get consensus and kind of get people's input. And it's tempting just to kind of keep marching through that really long to-do list that we just spoke about. But in fact, sometimes, you just kind of have to let it sit. And that's something that my co-founder, Dave Winsborough, kind of taught me. I worked for him before he was a co-founder at another company. And he really taught me that. It's like, sometimes you just have to let it sit and kind of let it percolate and kind of let the decisions kind of, the dots connect themselves.
And how do you know when to actually engage folks in that decision-making process versus just be like, F it, like, I just got to say, this is how it's going to go?
Yeah. Good. I would say it's like a level of like confidence and overconfidence versus competence, right? It's like, is this a domain or is this problem something that I actually have like real expertise and knowledge in? Or is this something that, I'm over my skis and, I really should kind of defer to someone else's judgment. And I think that's okay to do so. I think there is kind of a pressure or an expectation that leaders need to be seen to kind of know everything. And I'll tell you I know next to nothing. And so all you're trying to do is direct the flow of traffic at times. And so my colleague Thomas Chamorro wrote a great book about incompetent leaders. He speaks exactly to that point, Angela, which is, we look for leaders that seem to have all the answers when in fact, it's impossible to expect one person to kind of have all the answers, and they should be deferring decisions to more competent people around them. That is in a form a sign of competence. And so I try to do that as much as possible, and I encourage others to do so too. You just obviously have to be careful that it doesn't ultimately lead to laissez-faire kind of style leadership where you're just letting, you're deferring everything to someone else. You have to obviously take charge at some point. But, the idea is you do that just when it's needed, and you trust everyone else to kind of lend their expertise in service of the team's mission.
I appreciate you sharing that perspective, because as I chat with more and more leaders, I realize that is such a hard thing to do, right? Because it's sometimes not until hindsight where you're like, well, everyone's pissed off, right? Because they
Yeah,
could have
that
helped.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone could have helped me avoid whatever, right? Because I just made their life that much harder. And then other times
Yeah.
it's just a matter of getting clarity around this is why we had to do it the way that we did.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, cool. And then they go along with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, bro. I mean, I'm sure I've done that as well. In fact, I know I have. I know I've pissed people off, but it's that's a part of the experience.
For sure. And as we slowly wrap up our conversation, what do you think it takes to unleash the potential of individuals and organizations?
I think it's about support. It's about creating the right culture, a culture whereby people have the space to learn, to make mistakes. They have access to the resources that they need to engage in that learning. I think it's about having a culture whereby people are supportive of each other, and it's about kind of having kind of leaders that you can trust and ultimately are on your side, right? And kind of don't have these kind of crazy power imbalances where basically you're just my minions doing my work, but rather the leader is there to kind of help you become the best version of you, and actually cares for your well-being and cares for how you're feeling and kind of what your workload is like, and so on and so forth. I think if you do those things right, the rest of it kind of can take care of itself.
Reece, thank you so much for sharing your insights on that. And as we wrap up our conversation, my last question to you is, what is one thing that is top of mind for you that we can either celebrate with you or help you with?
Appreciate that. I would say for the next 12 months, I'm most excited just about seeing where Deeper Signals goes. I know that may be trite for a founder to say, but it's very true. This thing is always evolving. There's always new people joining the team, and strange and surprising things happen. And so it's never predictable. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
Well, I'm excited for you and your team. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights and your story today, Reece. And to everyone else who's tuned into another episode, thank you for your time and attention. It means more to me than you'll know, and I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.